The NFL is more and more every year becoming a passing league. It already is, it already has been for a long time, but as the years go on, we see the transition is still continuing. The biggest names in the game, besides quarterbacks, are wide receivers. Big names like Ja'Marr Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, just to name a few, are the most exciting players in the game for sure. And front offices and teams are starting to see the value there too. We want the big plays, and so do these teams. Guys can be difference makers. A difference maker like Ja'Marr Chase can take a 4-win team to being 1 win away from the Super Bowl, 1 win away from holding a Lombardi trophy. So why would the title of this video say teams should stop taking wide receivers as high as they're starting to? Well, let me explain. Last year in the 2022 NFL Draft, 6 wide receivers were drafted in the top 18 picks. That's a third of the first 18 players were wide receivers. Usually there are about 3 guys in the top 20 that are wide receivers. So why this sudden spike in receivers? Well, GMs tend to be very reactionary, and they go with what's working in the NFL, what has worked in the past few drafts. And the past 2 drafts have produced a lot of star power at wide receiver. In the first round, they've produced stars like Justin Jefferson, Ja'Marr Chase, Jalen Waddle, and CeeDee Lamb, and other productive guys that have shown good potential like Devontae Smith, like Jerry Jeudy, and like Brandon Ayuk, Rashad Bateman. We won't talk about these guys yet, and we definitely don't talk about this guy. And look, I don't blame the organizations for wanting a guy like Ja'Marr Chase or Justin Jefferson or CD that can sell tickets, get people in the seats, sell jerseys, and win games. And by no means am I overlooking the value that these guys bring to their teams. What I'm saying is just because you're drafting a wide receiver in the first round doesn't mean you're guaranteed the next star, the next fantasy football league winner, the next Randy Moss, Odell Beckham Jr., whatever, right? The next Madden cover guy. There's actually a much longer history of first round wide receivers disappointing, and you don't have to go that far back to look at them. We already mentioned guys like Tony, Ruggs, and Rager, guys that aren't even on the same teams that drafted them 2 years from the draft. You know, Tony's on the Chiefs, Rager's on the Vikings, I think, and Ruggs is behind bars. But the past 2 drafts have still produced some of the best receiving talent in the first round that we've seen. But before that, really, when was the last wide receiver that was picked within the top 15 that ended up being the superstar we expected them to? Because you don't take a wide receiver in the first round in the top 15 if you don't think they're going to be an absolute superstar. That's not what a team's wanting from a top 15 pick, is just an okay receiver. They're expecting something great. For that, you'd have to go all the way back, in my opinion, to 2014, a draft that had actually 2 of them, Mike Evans and Odell Beckham Jr., in what was really a legendary wide receiver class. But even in that legendary wide receiver class, on top of Evans and Beckham, where you had guys like Brandon Cooks, you had Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry, and possibly the best not only of them all, but of anyone in the NFL today, Davante Adams, on top of all of that, the number 1 wide receiver on the board has been kind of a disappointment. Sammy Watkins was a beast at Clemson, and Buffalo thought they had the next superstar wide receiver that was going to light the league on fire. After a couple promising seasons to start his career with 980 yards and 1,040 yards to start, he never even hit 700 again. But even if you want to call the 2014 draft a proof of concept that you can take elite wide receiver talent at the top end of a draft in the top 15, let's really look at the draft since then. 2015, the first receiver off the board at the number 4 overall pick seems to prove the idea that it can be done. Amari Cooper has been an incredibly reliable receiver in the NFL, and after playing for teams like the Raiders and then the Cowboys, somehow is quietly very good and quietly very consistent. He put up 5,000-yard seasons in his first 6 in the NFL, but never went over 1,200 and never had a season with more than 8 touchdowns. A multiple-time Pro Bowler. And now he's gone to where all receivers go to die, Cleveland. Chicago picked Kevin White at number 7 overall, a pick that many Chicago Bears fans would love to forget. White had a lot of injury problems and never topped 200 yards. Probably considered one of the biggest busts at wide receiver. A lot of circumstances didn't go his way, but it's safe to say they wish they could have that pick back. Devontae Parker at 14 to the Dolphins had a solid 7 years for Miami, but one season over 1,000 yards and 0 Pro Bowls is not what you're hoping for from a top 15 wideout. And if we extend it to the entire first round, Nelson Aguilar, Philip Dorsett, and Brashad Perriman don't have a 900-yard season between the three of them. 2016, there was only one receiver in the top 15 of the draft. Understandable after the hit or miss draft the year before. Like I said, GMs tend to be pretty reactionary. The Browns, I know, not a good start, at number 15 overall picked Corey Coleman. After 2 seasons with the Browns, he never hit over 450 yards, which is probably why you've never heard of him. He was traded for a 7th round pick after only 2 years, ended up in New York playing for the Giants, and then that was the end of his career after 1 season. The other 3 first-round receivers went back-to-back at 21, 22, and 23 in Will Fuller, Josh Doctson, and Laquan Treadwell, which all have similarly been pretty big letdowns for their teams if you consider where they were picked. And next we move on to 2017, a major cautionary tale for taking wide receivers early, and a draft I heavily remember as it was really the first season I really started getting into draft coverage and really diving deep into the tape of college guys and getting into the just draft coverage in general. There were 3 taken in the first round, all in the top 10. An important footnote I'd like to make, all drafted in front of the 10th overall pick, Patrick Mahomes. So keep that in mind as we go through these guys. Corey Davis was taken at number 5 by the Tennessee Titans, 1 pick in front of Pro Bowl safety Jamal Adams. He's by no means a bad player in the NFL, but a solid player that has had a few good seasons definitely isn't worth a top 5 pick. People thought he was going to be a superstar as he showed flashes at Western Michigan, but he was mossing guys, sure, but in the MAC, not in the Big Ten. I thought he would be a good player, but I definitely did not think he was worth the top 5 pick that the Titans picked him at. Mike Williams started his career looking like a Kevin White level bust, but has really come into his own and has had 2,000-yard seasons to his career so far. But he's been up and down so far and definitely not worth the pick right in front of Christian McCaffrey. I think that's safe to say. And of course, one of the biggest draft busts in recent history, the receiver the Bengals tried before Ja'Marr Chase, John Ross. Ross was solid as a wide receiver at Washington with blazing speed, but never really impressed me in games. But when he went to the Combine and set a record 4.22 40-yard dash time, he was pretty much locked in as a top pick in most people's minds. But that was really the highlight of his football career, as he hasn't even put up 1,000 yards in his career combined, let alone in a season. And again, was the pick right before Patrick Mahomes. Because of the disaster in 2017 with wide receivers, 2018 and even 2019, there were no top 20, let alone top 15 picked wide receivers in the draft. And guys like DJ Moore, Marquise Brown, and Calvin Ridley have been pretty good wide receivers that were drafted between 20 and 32 in those drafts, as long as you keep Calvin Ridley away from a gambling table. Those guys have been pretty good and have shown flashes of greatness. And I don't think Patriots fans want me to talk about N'Keal Harry. But there were none in that top 15. Again, like I said, GMs are very reactionary. They don't want to seem dumb with their picks. They don't want to be embarrassed by their picks. So when 3 other teams get embarrassed in the first round from the last year, teams are going to be like, no, I'm going to hold off. I'll take a wide receiver later because they want to hold on to their job. And finally, the 2020 draft. And really, Justin Jefferson's amazing rookie season opened the door for teams to feel more comfortable drafting wide receivers in the top 10 again, which 3 were the next year. And it's hard to argue that Ja'Marr Chase hasn't been worth that 5th overall pick. And I won't. I'm not going to argue that he absolutely has been. But it just shows you to get from Odell in 2014 to Ja'Marr in 2021, how big of a talent you have to be, how rare and special of a talent you have to be to earn being picked that early in the NFL draft at that position. Especially because of reason number 2, why I think smart teams don't take receivers early in the draft. Because you can get not just good, Pro Bowl level talent, Pro Bowl level wide receivers in the 2nd, 3rd, and even 4th and 5th rounds every single year in the NFL draft. So why not spend that 1st overall pick, 5th overall pick, top 15 pick on a more valuable position? Since 2010, there have been a combined 56 Pro Bowl appearances drafted outside of the 1st round. Why take a chance and use a top pick on a pass catcher when you can get so many talented ones down the board? Alshon Jeffrey, Davante Adams, Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman were all second-round picks. Emmanuel Sanders, T.Y. Hilton, Keenan Allen, some of the best players in the league at some points, like Antonio Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs, were all available on day 3 of their drafts. And it happens every season. Even last season, Amon-Ra St. Brown wasn't picked until 112. Which gets me to my last reason why I think wide receivers shouldn't be taken so highly in the draft. There are constantly, now more than ever, talented wide receivers coming into the league every year. And not just the elite ones we've talked about, but contributors that make up a roster. Every team in the league now has at least one, probably two pretty good wide receivers. Okay, maybe except the Bears and the Packers, but you know what I mean. Almost every team. They're not going to be happy about that one. They're not going to be happy about that one, but that's all right. But every other team out there has a bigger need than at wide receiver across all their positions. And it's because all the skill position players that are playing in high school right now and are watching the NFL, they don't want to be corners. They don't want to be safeties. They want to be wide receivers. They want to be the next Odell. They want to be the next Ja'Marr Chase. They're the most popular players in the sport, the most talented, the most celebrated, and now the highest paid, all behind quarterbacks. They get the shoe deals, they get the commercials, and I don't blame them. Who wouldn't want to be the next guy, the next star? But with all these insanely talented wide receivers, the value of drafting one, especially that early, drops. I mean, really just simple supply and demand economics, right? With all these talented wide receivers to defend now, trying to stop a new elite receiver every single week as a defensive coordinator, the more valuable position and the position that the smarter teams are starting to take early on is at corner. You need guys that can match up and lock up these elite receivers every week. Guys like Jalen Ramsey, J.C. Jackson, Xavier Howard, Jair Alexander, that give you a chance to stop these guys on defense. And more importantly, there are so few elite ones across the league today. But we just had a new one come into the league last year. Sauce Gardner in his rookie season has already proven to be worth that 4th overall pick for the Jets and is looking like, can I say this? He's locking up everybody in his wake, and he might be the best corner in the league. And I know that's early to say it, but if you watch him play, I don't know that it is. I feel like it might be true. And even this coming year with top prospects at receiver like Jordan Addison out of SC, Quentin Johnson out of TCU, Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State, and Kayshon Boutte out of LSU, I don't think teams drafting near the top of the draft because they were near the bottom in the win column should be considering these guys in the top 15. Even though I know probably 2, maybe even 3 of these guys will go within the top 15 picks. With possible franchise QBs like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, and great defensive linemen like Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, and Myles Murphy, there are too many important positions to address than to address wide receiver that early, especially with possibly another elite corner on the board. I have to watch his tape first. I don't necessarily know how I feel yet, but other people feel like he's another possible shutdown corner, and Kelee Ringo out of Georgia is also on the board. But I think the success so far throughout this 2022 season of guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave is probably going to have an effect on the GMs, again, very reactionary, going into this draft. And I think at least 3, maybe even 4 of those guys will go within the top 20 picks of the draft. Personally, if I'm a GM, I'm waiting to the 2nd or 3rd round, biding my time, and just addressing more important positions early in the draft, waiting until the 2nd or 3rd round to take a receiver. And, maybe I end up with nothing, but maybe I end up with Cooper Kupp or Davante Adams. And I'll take that gamble and address a more important position early. To me, I am not taking a receiver in the top 10 unless they are generational. And I mean generational. I know that word gets thrown around, it gets overused, but I mean generational. Like a Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, Jamar Chase, Randy Moss type. Or like the guy in the 2024 NFL draft that I would throw literally everything I've said today away for. And I would take in the top 5 of the NFL draft if I were a GM. Just throw the whole video away. Give me Marvin Harrison.